How do you want to be remembered?
We want to be remembered for person by person making it possible.
You, not we. Elizabeth Holmes.
For making it possible for people who could never afford the ability to get care, and for making it possible for people who otherwise maybe would have had to say goodbye too soon because they found out someone they loved had heart disease too late, to not have to do that.
That was Theranos' founder, Elizabeth Holmes, on Squawk Box back in 2015. The rise and fall of the blood testing company, once valued at $9 billion, is the focus of a new HBO documentary. Joining us right now is John Carreyrou. He's the author of Bad Blood. John's reporting was the very first to call out Theranos and Elizabeth Holmes, raise questions about what turned out to be a big fraud. And John, thank you very much for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Incredible book based on incredible reporting. This was somebody who fooled so many people. We had her on Squawk Box. I know that the HBO documentary talked to some of the reporters who got fooled by this from Fortune in different places. What made you first start asking questions and saying, what's really happening here?
She came onto my radar when I read a New Yorker profile of her in, I think it was December of 2014. And I'd done a lot of investigative reporting about medicine and healthcare, and the central conceit of that story was that as a 19-year-old Stanford sophomore, she had dropped out, and then without any medical training, without any really scientific training, she'd gone on and revolutionized blood testing. And knowing how medicine works and how you add value in medical science, I was immediately suspicious of that notion. To be fair, I probably wouldn't have done anything with it if I hadn't gotten a tip several weeks later from a pathologist in the Midwest who'd read the same New Yorker story, knew a lot more about blood testing than I did, and he was immediately suspicious of the claims, wrote an item on his blog, pathology blog. He moonlighted as the writer of this obscure blog at the time, and then was contacted by someone who'd been involved in a patent suit with Elizabeth, who told him, you're onto something, and that's how it sort of got rolling.
I mean, the black box technology that she would never share with anyone, that she said was responsible for being able to test all of these different tests with just a pinprick of blood, that was the huge controversy. I guess the question maybe is why more people didn't raise questions sooner on, particularly given some of the investors and the people on her board.
Well, there were a lot of scientists and a lot of people in the diagnostics industry, lab directors, et cetera, who were skeptical behind the scenes of her claims.
They should have known.
Yeah.
And a lot of them were very skeptical to the point of outright doubting it.
They knew what the technology was, the real experts in the field, I know, Waxel used to, Sam used to message me all the time that this is no way that this is real.
But the thing is, scientists
how did they fool like Toby Cosgrove? How did they fool Cleveland Clinic? How did they? And they had everybody on
George Schultz.
Well, those were like the old guard. They were all in their
Henry Kissinger.
Half of them were in their 90s, and they weren't looking at the science.
Medical.
But there were real scientists, theoretically, that knew this was impossible.
So the scientists are very respectful in general, and so they're not going to come out and call someone out unless they can prove it. I think that's part of what was going on. But the other part is that, Theranos would enter these partnerships or do these studies with another institution, such as the Cleveland Clinic, and then it would make everyone sign NDAs. And then if you were a Theranos partner and you'd actually seen under the hood, you couldn't say anything because you had signed an NDA.
But is that a legal NDA when you are basically perpetrating a fraud? Can you be forced to keep that under the...
When I started making contact with ex-employees and started cultivating whistleblowers in order to put out my first story, the argument that I made to them was that an NDA can't be used to thwart whistleblowing about wrongdoing and about breaking the law. That was very much, something that I argued, and I think it's true. I don't think an NDA can be used.
Unfortunately, it probably keeps these whistleblowers in a position saying, yeah, I might be in the right legally, but I'm going to have to defend myself, and that's really expensive.
Right. But fortunately, two of the whistleblowers in this story, Tyler Schultz and Erica Chung, who were featured in the documentary, have fared quite well. And Tyler's now got a startup. Erica heads an incubator in Hong Kong. They were both on the Stanford campus recently talking to students. They've become sort of folk heroes in in Silicon Valley. And so
It's good to see them do well
yeah.
after being whistleblowers.
So, John, I have to say congratulations on the book. One of the few books I've read in the last couple of years where I literally had to take a break to go to sleep so that I could go finish. I finished in 24 hours. One of the questions that keeps people that I've talked to about the story is like, how is this person walking around as, outside the Crossbar Hotel?
Elizabeth Holmes.
Elizabeth Holmes.
Right.
How was that?
So the U.S. Attorney's Office in San Francisco actually charged her criminally 3 weeks after my book came out back in June, as well as Sunny Balwani, who was her boyfriend at the time, number 2 executive of the company. They're facing 11 counts of wire fraud and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. The case has been moving somewhat slowly in federal court in San Jose because there's been delays with the discovery process. But the next status conference in the case is mid-April. The judge could very well set a date for the trial in April, and then we could see a trial start either at the very end of this year or in the first quarter of 2020.
Is there any way that people beneath her and Sunny were telling them that the black box really did work, or did she know that she was fooling everyone?
Well, the people, the scientists and the engineers who were working for her and for Sunny did not know what she was telling investors behind closed doors.
Did she know it didn't work? I mean, it's a simple question.
Oh, she knew. Absolutely.
She knew. Well,
knew.
then I don't understand what. I'm back to Jason's questions. Right. What happened here?
Well, I think her defense lawyers and his defense lawyers are going to make the case that they thought they were on their way. And that they thought they were going to get there eventually, and that, yes, this has turned out to be a business failure, but a business failure is not.
Do you have any technology that would lead you to believe that they could think they were on the way to it?
They were really far away. I mean, they were years and years and years away.
I mean, did they have technology as good as the current, as the existing tech, or anything different than the existing technology?
No, I mean, the one box that they had, the second to last iteration of the technology, which they called Edison after Thomas Edison, was actually a very rudimentary piece of machinery. It was actually a glorified glue dispensing robot that had been turned into a blood testing machine. So they simply did not have any whiz-bang technology.
And you throw in false negatives and false positives. And I've talked about, I don't know which I'd rather get, honestly. But both of them are so bad for people that are...
I'd definitely rather get a false positive.
If you get a false negative, you can have all kinds of procedures done that can then put you in a position where there is something wrong.
Yeah, but if you get a false positive,
then you don't know you have it. But if you have a false negative,
no, false negative is the
where you
bad
don't
thing.
know.
False positive is where you get
terrible. They're both terrible.
They're both terrible, but one means you have the disease, one means you don't.
And they voided $1 million.
You'd like to think you had cancer when you didn't?
No, I don't want that. But if I had to have the two,
get chemo and get an operation, have something removed.
None of them are good. I agree.
They voided 1 million blood test results, and I happen to know that the last lab director at Theranos, who was hired to try to clean up the mess, lobbied Elizabeth to void many more blood test results, and she declined. So we still actually don't know the full scale of the errors.
The SEC seems like a completely toothless organization when you read what has happened from their perspective on this. They fined her $500,000. They said she can no longer be in control of Theranos, and it's got to be 10 years before she can run a publicly traded company. That seems ridiculous.
Right, and there was a 3 or 4 month gap between when the SEC took that action and when the DOJ indicted her. And for a while there, I was getting calls and emails almost on a daily basis from people who were outraged that that she got off so lightly.
Between that and what they've done with Elon Musk? Or I agree,
but the SEC may have known that the feds were coming in afterwards.
Yeah. Maybe, yeah.
Well, how as far as Silicon Valley is concerned, do you think this says anything about the culture of Silicon Valley more broadly? I mean, there's this avalanche of money that's been created by 0% interest rates.
Right.
People are looking for the next new thing. There's always, of course, these ventures that are happy to separate people from their money. But is it worse now, do you think? Are there more Theranoses out there?
I mean, I think it does say something about Silicon Valley. It is a lesson. You've had this ecosystem over the past 10, 12 years built up over there of these unicorns. There are now hundreds of them that are worth more than $1 billion. And they're not going public. For a decade now, Uber has existed and has not yet gone public. And there are many others. And so you have this ecosystem where they don't have to talk to analysts. They don't have to talk to the press. They don't have to open their books. because they're not going public, and therefore there's much less transparency, and you create an environment in which fraud can thrive. And then I think it says many other things about Silicon Valley culture. I think there's this myth in Silicon Valley that you have these founders, young dropouts who are all knowing and all seeing. They can see around corners. They're geniuses. And I think Steve Jobs popularized that notion. And now there are a lot of people in Silicon Valley who believe that that's a thing, the mythical founder. And I think she surfed that wave, and people bought into her because they bought into this notion.